Okay. Okay. So for the last time, my quote from page 150 is, "I resolved to flee." And my question is, Hannah finally decided to escape. Do you think it's more self-driven, or due to fear?
I think it's self-driven.
Yeah.
What's self-driven?
Like, how do you explain self-driven?
Being self-driven is like when nothing else but yourself is motivating you to do
like
something. So I
You're
think,
motivated to do stuff.
so I think she's like, I think she's doing it for her own well-being and less of fear. Because I think it's chapter 19 or something, she is like fully committed and ready to escape. Like she's fully ready. She's like, I accept the consequences. I know what's gonna happen if I fail, and she's fully ready to escape. So I think with her choosing to escape, I think it's fully motivated by herself and her wants and her need for freedom.
Yeah. I don't think it really has anything with fear. Eric could have a little bit due, but I feel like it's mostly due to self-driven because she wanted to escape and she wanted to better herself. Listen.
Right. So from page 160, we have Hannah trolling alone, hiding, avoiding capture. It was like one of those little CC things. So my question is, how does isolation affect Hannah mentally? And follow-up question, would it make her stronger or more vulnerable?
To answer the follow-up question, I think it would make her stronger. Yeah, it would make her stronger because she's trying to avoid the capture. So she's trying to like be by herself and not have to depend on somebody else and not have to like she's on her own trying to avoid her slave master and trying to avoid getting captured. So I think it makes her stronger overall.
I think that I think that the isolation, the way that I saw it, I thought that the isolation made her more vulnerable because there's nobody really to protect her. She's only relying on her own senses and her own, like what she knows how to do in the wilderness. So I think that her being isolated and her traveling on her own made her more vulnerable in the sense that, like, not that she's weak, but that if it comes down to it, she's gonna have to fight her way out of whatever situation she's put in, you know?
Yeah.
Okay. So from page 163, the quote is, "I dared not to trust anyone." How does this show slavery affected her trust, and why is it so dangerous for her to trust anyone currently?
I think that it's made it so that like, people are willing to, in a sense, rat her out. And I think that throughout the book, there's moments where there's a sense of community between enslaved people, but at the same time, there's people who are willing to sacrifice others for their own gain. So I feel like it's just trust is so dangerous because you don't know who's truly on your side. And also, like we said in one of our previous discussions, people are driven by their own thoughts, wants, needs, actions. Like everyone is self-driven here. So it's very likely that that's her to trust people because she doesn't like it's hard to trust people because she doesn't know who she can and can't trust. If that makes sense.
Okay. So for my next quote from page 178, "Freedom was near, yet uncertain." Why does Hannah still feel uncertain about freedom? From page 178, it says freedom was. Oh wait, we already talked about that one.
No.
Okay. From page 178, it says freedom was near, yet uncertain. Why does Hannah still feel uncertain about freedom, even though she's so close to it?
I think she feels uncertain about freedom because she's never had freedom before.
Yeah, that,
So she doesn't know what to do with it, right?
yeah, because she's never experienced being on her. She's always experienced being controlled by somebody, having somebody tell her what to do and stuff. And so when she gets freedom, it's like it's a new thing to her. It's like something that she's never experienced. So she kind of is kind of panicking, like, how am I supposed to do this? And
Mm-hmm.
how am I supposed to be in a free world and be a free person?
Okay. So from page 180, it says, I fear capture more than death. Why does death feel like a better option than being enslaved again?
I mean, because she isn't she isn't feeling,
Controlled.
yeah, like,
But also, if she went back to being enslaved after trying to escape, wouldn't they just kill her anyway?
Probably. Or they could just punish her to where it would be unbearable.
Or like she wanted to get at that point.
Yeah.
So I think that it's she'd die either way. Like she could either die here or escape, or try to escape and die trying. It's like,
I kind of thought of it in a different way. I thought of it as if she gets captured, her humanity dying. So at that point, it'd just be inhumane and she just wouldn't have a reason to live at that point.
mm-hmm.
But, anyways, next one, so 192. Hannah was nearing safety, and this is her transition into freedom. So it says, the question is, what's the emotion Hannah might have been feeling as she got closer to gaining freedom?
she would probably feel good, right?
Yeah, but also kind of nervous.
Like excitement and fear.
A mix of those two. Cause like we said earlier, she's never really experienced it, but she could also be excited to experience what freedom feels like, but at the same time being nervous to not know what to do with her freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm gonna give y'all a little background on this one, even though y'all all read it at some point. From page 185, Hannah had to disguise herself to say Hannah, so that way, she could go and gain her freedom, and nobody would really recognize her and bring her back. Because, as we said earlier, people would do anything for freedom or for money.
Mm-hmm.
So they would take her and bring her back to slave, or make her their own slave and still sell her. So, why might Hannah wear a disguise while traveling?
So I think we talked about this in the first discussion that we did, the one that wasn't recorded, and we were talking about how people often, it was either in the first or the second discussion that we did, but I remember a part where another woman disguised like her daughter or someone as a man so that her daughter wouldn't get sold into the slave trade
Oh yeah.
because she was like really pretty or something. And I think I think that when I was doing research or something, it was seen that this was used a lot in the Underground Railroad and in just when enslaved people were trying to escape. A lot of them were using disguises to try and make sure that they could get their way out so no one would recognize them. So I think she would wear a disguise because it could provide her some protection to some point, and then also it could not guarantee her safety, but make sure that she feels safer while she's trying to escape. So because nobody would know her.
So, from page 195, it says, I was free. What do you think freedom truly means to her?
Like a sense of not newness, but like a sense of she's finally in the open world. She finally doesn't have somebody controlling her, telling her when she eat, when she is asleep. I feel like it means that she's truly out there in the world now, and that she can really be a free person and control how she lives her life, and not let a slave master dictate everything she does and punish her and stuff like that.
Does anyone know what she ended up doing at the end of the book? Like after she was free, what did she end up doing? She ended up becoming a teacher. So she was teaching. She went up north, and her mom started teaching other formerly enslaved people and their children.
Mm-hmm.
So I think because she was always educated throughout the entire thing, so I think she wanted to have the power to be freely educated and to gain more knowledge than what people thought that she could do in the beginning. That's what I think. But Sienna, what do you think?
I think that so like Hannah's well it's really good that you brought up what like she ends up doing at the end of the book because you know knowledge is power and power is freedom and it's the fact that she was as you said she was always well educated and well brought up even when those who were more like not slaves or like maids or like mistresses they would constantly devalue her education and her character and her knowledge. So I think it's that's a really good thing that she went on to do, and it kind of like reinforces the themes of the book and the traits of her character.
Before we move on, I have one more follow-up question. Like this isn't on here, but what do y'all think the true theme of this book is? You know, like just for when we do the project, what do you think the theme of the book is?
Like, are you asking for a thematic statement or just like
just the theme. What do you think the lesson would be in it, or what they want you to figure out from the book?
I think that through the book, I think it's trying to get us to see, like, of course, it's a historical, like, autobiographical narrative.
Right.
But I think that the book is really trying to get us to see, like, other people had it so hard, and, like, retellings of it don't really do the slave trade, they don't do slavery and the slave trade. They don't do that justice, whereas if you hear it from someone and you get to see their experience, I think that it puts it into a bigger perspective.
I can't really give a thematic statement right off the top, but I see like topics that could contribute to a thematic statement of like how a person values the value of how you see yourself and the value of how people see you and because we see a lot of like how people value themselves higher than the slave or how the slave values themselves and like when you are enslaved or escaping slavery or like for example the mistress who was a slave and didn't know it until it was told to her and it was used as blackmail against her. All of the value that you have as a person can really shape how you like come across issues or conflicts, and it really shapes your perseverance and resistance to certain situations.
Mm-hmm. So now I'm gonna do my reporter section. So I feel like the last part of the book was better than the first part.
Agree.
Personally. But I feel like that's for every book because I feel like this book and her story particularly had a really nice conclusion. Like she got what she wanted.
Yeah.
But for the first one, I said that this first topic would focus on characters and interactions, and it says, "You see, there has been strange doings at the old place. Our master, whose beautiful wife had gone to Europe to attend the dying bed of some near and dear relatives, took great fancy to beautiful female slaves." So this quote introduces a character named Lizzie and her story. So it follows the corruption and abuse that enslaved people endured at like the Linendale estate. And it shows how enslaved women were often exploited by their master. So that's just that's one of the topics that I saw. And then another major event happened in chapter 14, page 117. She was an English woman of an aristocratic family. Had we been the most loathsome and degraded reptiles, she could not have treated us with any greater hauteur or contempt. So this is talking about Mrs. Cosgrove and her cruelty towards slaves, and this, I think that it shows a very stark difference in class during this time. So it shows how people of a higher class were not afraid to show their racism and disdain to those of a differing race or to a different class or race. And Mrs. Cosgrove had the ability to show affection to a select group of individuals and was creating a sharp contrast between her hateful actions and like her caring nature that you would see later. And then on chapter 15, page 190, we saw a major part of the plot, and I think this could go into our theme. It said, you are rich enough yet, you have plenty of these human cattle. And so this quote for me showed how slaves during this time how enslaved people during this time were valued and what they were seen as. So it shows how enslaved individuals were often dehumanized and or treated as property, not as humans. And this was building upon the novel's criticism of slavery through the eyes of a slave. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then a shift in setting. For the next one, we have a shift in setting or the mood or a major event. So this took place in chapter 17, page 213. As I have observed before nothing, but this would have impelled me to fight. Dear is freedom to every human being, and bitter as servitude must be to all who experience it. I knew too much of the dangers and difficulties to be apprehended from running away, ever to have attempted such a thing through ordinary motives. So these two sentences showed a clear shift in Hannah. So she was no longer just enduring slavery, she was now deciding to actively escape. And the way that this was worded shows that her rebellion was driven, I think we talked about this, was driven by need. And this was showing a shift from her passive means of survival, just going with the flow, making sure that she wasn't the one in the hot seat, to her now finally taking control of her life and her freedom. And so the next one I have is a character interaction. This took place on chapter 17, page 214. And this one says, but I remembered the Hebrew children and Daniel in the lion's den, and felt that God could protect me and preserve me through all. So this shows how Hannah and many other enslaved people relied on their faith as they would prep for their escape. So her belief that God would protect her only builds up her courage. So I think that was something that was helping her through this time get ready to escape. And it showed how religion had the ability to motivate and support her and many others during their escapes for freedom. And then for chapter 18, page 217, I saw a plot. So this one says, the foxes have holes and the birds of the air have nests. Stopped not till I, overcome with fatigue and complete exhaustion, had I traversed fields, leaped fences, and passed for some distance the boundaries of Mr. Wheeler's estate. So during this scene, Hannah experiences homelessness during her escape, and we talked about this one too, the uncertainty that she was feeling, and it symbolizes the uncertainty she felt and how truly vulnerable she was when she was homeless and when she was trying to escape. And then chapter 19, page 230, this was a character interaction. Jacob and myself had traveled many days together, but strange to say, he had not penetrated my disguise. He learned to love me, however, as a younger brother, and his society and gentle care greatly relieved the difficulties of our toilsome journey. So during this part, we had talked about this too. Hannah disguised herself as a male, and then she formed a bond with another enslaved man, I believe, named Jacob. And it shows how enslaved people would trust this was a part when they were trusting each other more, and that they would cooperate with each other for a common good, which would mean like their mutual escape. And then there's another major event, chapter 19, page 231. Jacob gave one groan, dropped his oar, and fell to the bottom of the boat, which instantly swung around and became unmanageable and drifted down the stream. So this showcased Jacob's death as like a more tragic moment. Even though they had just recently met, this was a very tragic and dark moment for her. And I think she writes it really well. So it showed the true dangers of escaping and the violent fate that faced enslaved people if they were caught, or if there was if they were caught or brought back, or if they trusted the wrong person, this could be their fate. They could die a very brutal death. And then chapter 20, page 238, this was a major, setting. So, farther down the river was a steamboat landing, and my preparations began being complete. She accompanied me thither, and saw me safe on board. This moment captures a major step towards freedom, as waterways like rivers, streams, etc., were commonly used as transportation routes for enslaved people, and they were a major key in escaping successfully. So, I know that in a couple other slave narratives that other people are reading, they also escaped through boats or via boat, and it seems like that was a rather popular choice.
Yeah.
That was popular, and then also just the Underground Railroad system was also popular. Popular, in quotes. And then for number 10, we have a shift in setting or mood. So this was in chapter 21, page 244. I dwell now in a neat little cottage and kept a school for colored children. It is well attended, and I enjoy myself almost as well in imparting knowledge to others as I did obtaining it myself when I was a child. So this is a satisfying and heartwarming conclusion as Hannah finally achieves her much-deserved freedom and stability, and this ends her story with hope for the future and her independence. So that was the main reason why I had asked as a lead-in to my section, because I know I had a point about that in here. Yeah, the book was good. Would I read it again? Absolutely not. I don't like reading longer books. I also just don't like reading, so.
That makes sense. Okay, so I'm gonna read you something. So for chapter 13, my quote was, only one whaler in the entire United States lived in both North Carolina and Washington between 1850 and 1880. I put this refers to John Hill Wheeler, the real slaveholder of Hannah Crafts, showing how the story is based on real people in real times and showing all the historical facts that really went into making the story. My second quote from chapter 14 was, Crafts seems to have drawn on the two most popular and widely criticized slave mentors, Douglas' narrative and Brown's narrative. This shows how she was influenced earlier by other slave narratives like Frederick Douglass and William Brown, which also describes similar journeys of slavery and going through certain things while they were enslaved and even after they were enslaved. Okay, my third one, the quote is, this became a cause celebrated one of the first challenges of the notorious Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. This basically describes how James Johnson escaped slavery and how he dealt with the challenges of getting the Slave Act, which it kind of built tension in the South because of the act, and it basically just built tension over the fact of slavery, and people were debating about if the act was right or not. My fourth quote is on April 15th, 1848. 77 captures attempted to escape Washington, D.C. on a schooner called Pearl. This refers to the Pearl escape attempt, one of the largest escape attempts attempted in slavery history. This event shows how the enslaved people tried to escape and they worked together through the Underground Railroad to seek freedom from slavery and to seek freedom outside it, and how they just worked together to seek freedom. In chapter 17, it says, in the distance was a cotton field with a snowy fleece bursting richly from the pod and sweeping down the river's edge was a large plantation of rice. This basically matches this talks about the Wheelers family's plantation and how big it was, and basically it's just describing their plantation in North Carolina, showing that she was on their plantation, and showing them like places in the novels that was actually mentioned, and it's a real place. Their plantation, I don't think it's still there to this day, but it shows basically the imagery of how their plantation looked and what she's seen.
Do you think it's one of those historical places?
Yeah.
Like they have like a lot of plantation down in somewhere. I don't know, it's in North Carolina.
Yeah, I think it's still there. It might still be there.
When you say historical, you mean like they try to reenact exactly?
No, it's like a historical location.
Yeah, like
Like, you know how they have all those like big metal signs
buildings
downtown
and stuff. Yeah.
where it's like this is a historical site of whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if that's one of those places. Like if the government keeps up with it or whatever.
You might. Okay, my next quote was Jane Johnson escaped from the Willard family in 1855. Came to light back in 2002 when William L. Andrews noted Johnson's story, recorded by William Still. My own work in this chapter will demonstrate Johnson's escape path was first developed by the District Underground Railroad conductors Thomas and Elizabeth Smallwood. This refers to basically Jane Johnson's escape from slavery from the Willard family and how he led the famous court case that drew it was a famous court case back in the day that drew national attention, trying to basically go on conflicts over slavery in the U.S. and if slavery was still a thing back then. And it just refers to how he escaped back then and nobody really knew about it in a sense. Okay, my third and on my eighth quote on chapter 18. By 1860, the first year that a census encounters Johnson as a free woman, she is recorded as being captured, reading and writing. This shows Jane Johnson learned to read and write after gaining her freedom. Literacy was important for formerly enslaved people because it helped them gain independence, freedom, and participate more in society. Like we talked about with Hannah, she was able to read and write, so she was able to do something once she escaped freedom. And so it was important that a lot of slaves escaped freedom and actually gained the education so they could learn to read and write and so they could be productive in the world and actually have something to go for. Okay. My next quote is in the attic she had discovered some old papers, including a letter from including a letter warning of Mr. Willard seeking an escaped slave in the region. The letter helped historians track Handicraft's escape route. It suggested that John Willard was searching for the escaped women in New York, supporting the idea that Handicrafts fled up north through the Underground Railroads. This is basically just another piece of history that shows Handicraft's story and how it really went down, and that she actually tried to escape, or she actually escaped through the Underground Railroad, and had the Underground Railroad actually help slaves really escape and gain their freedom.
Mm-hmm.
My 10th quote I put in North Carolina, Handicrafts writes in chapter 16 of the Bondwoman's narrative, Mr. Willard's fine plantation, simulated near Wilmington, the principal port of the state. Historians compared this description with land records and found that it likely refers to Liberty Hall, which this is more historical. It shows that the family property was near Murfreesboro, helping help connect the slave narrative to historical times, so they knew where his plantation was and where they kept all the slaves and how all the historical records were kept, basically.
Okay. I'm the deduction detective, and on page 73, I found 195. Amigal emotions of grief, rage, and shame were truly awful. The use of the word mingled suggested a chaotic, messy overlap of feelings, while awful was used here in mean something that inspired terror, or rather than just being bad. And the crafts used these strong words to show a total collapse of Mrs. Willard's vanity after her facing the back from the powder, and they show dramatic and intense and judgmental. Page 222. Ordered in the nation and had been occupied by successive generations of slaves. The word nation, Hannah had pointed a painful irony that the U.S. was to build on freedom and the slavery, but yet the slavery was still here. And the successively is basically where the children were built the same as their parents, meaning what their parents had gone through, the children had also faced that what their parents faced. And the crafts wanted to show that slavery wasn't just a mistake, but into a deep-rooted part of country that had existed before the U.S. and became a nation. So the reader wanted to see it as a family curse being like passed down to one generation to the next and making it impossible to break. This was a serious and deeply critical. Chapter 19, driven into the fields beneath the eye and lash of a brutal overseer. The words driven and lash, it like showed like cold and hard violence. It had framed like the overseer as a machine rather than a human.
Mm-hmm.
And the intention was to highlight the physical brutality.
Morality.
Brutality.
Brutality.
My bad. Anna didn't want to escape, like creating a sense of danger, and this was a violent and frightening tone. Chapter 15, surrounded by mysterious occasions, I seem suddenly to have grown old. The frayed, mysterious occasions made the setting feel like heavy and spooky. When Hannah had said like grown old, in that moment she had felt like she had lost her childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And the crafts had used these to show that the slavery was traumatizing and that it had like changed like the child's human like childhood, you know. And I lost myself. And she wanted to show that yeah, that's it. And it was this tone was like gloomy and heavy.
Mm-hmm.
In chapter 13, up to this point, Crafts had disguised her story so that she could not be traced. The word disguise was like to hide something, and the word it says it could not be traced, it was that it showed scared of being caught and how dangerous it was for her to write her own truth. The author wanted to show that how brave Hannah was, even though she was like still in danger, and she would still find a way to write her own story. Chapter 13, Mrs. Wheeler was a bigot in religion. The word bigot is so. Oh.
Bigot. Jesus Christ.
Bigot is someone who is narrow-minded by their beliefs. This has shown that Mrs. Wheeler wasn't like an actual good person, but instead like how she was acting. The author wanted to like expose that Mrs. Wheeler, she was like, the author wanted to expose Mrs. Wheeler. And she wanted the reader to show how enslaver was a hypocrite. Chapter 13, Jane made a bold appearances, testifying that she had fled of her own violation. Bold appearances means she showed up strongly. Own violation was a fancy way of saying her own choice. It has shown like Jane was being controlled of her life. The author showed that the enslaved women were not property, but they were like people of their own wills who had wanted to fought for their own freedom, which was a tone of inspiring. The quote, hating them for their pro-slavery feelings and their racism. The word hated is like a strong word, but it's like it just was a direct word to say, and leaving no doubt about how the author would feel. Using racism and pro-slavery labels exactly why they were bad people. And the author wanted to prove that the person who had written the book knew the Wheelers and wanted to get revenge by telling the truth, which was intense and determined. Taboo subject, chapter 13, taboo subjects as sexual subcussion could be packaged in acceptable generic terms.
Generic.
Yeah. It made it sound like she was rapping difficult truths so that others can handle it on their own. The author was explaining how Hannah wrote she has used storytelling tricks to talk about the horrible things that had happened to her, which was given like a tone of seriousness. And in chapter 14, she grew discontented and dissatisfied. The word discontented meaning someone unhappy with how they were being treated. Meanwhile, dissatisfied was like that Jane had deserved better than being enslaved. And the author had used these words through the voices of Mrs. Willard to show that enslaved people weren't happy as enslavers and had wanted to claim their own freedom, which was rebellious. So. And then,
Good job.
I mean,
It's a genuine question.
the English is broken.
Which one? Whatever. Girl, leave her alone. No, genuinely. What that means?
Okay, well, it's my turn now. So
Go.
I'm the bridge builder. So I start with chapter 15. Where Mrs. Cosgrove says, Mr. Cosgrove says, and you talk of pride and honor and womanly feeling, do you? Heaven knows that you have enough of the first, but it was womanly feeling that led you to thrust out a frail, delicate female and her babes to certain exposure and famine and almost certain death. I identified this as a external, internal, and I made a connection to gender issues. And Mr. Cosgrove is angry with his wife for dismissing and driving his slave to freedom, saying that she will have nothing to go to and her babies will starve. This is an external conflict because of the conflict between him and his wife, but it is also, with the gender issues, I made the connection that even though Mrs. Cosgrove is at fault, it is also Mr. Cosgrove who is at fault with the situation in its entirety, and he is the one who became intimate with his slaves and left his wife to drive them out. And I made this connection because of the treatment of enslaved women and his wife. And for my second, in chapter 15 again, Mrs. Cosgrove, when threatened with being thrown in jail for harming Mr. Cosgrove's slaves, he says, "Never mind your master." Oh wait, this is when she told the slave to go and run off and be free. So she says, "Never mind your master. I am the mistress of this house and will be. No one, not even him of whom you speak, shall thwart or interfere with my will. Get yourself and your children ready and be off. Steer right for the north and never stop short of Canada. You will be safe then, and your infants will not inherit the curse of their mother's slavery." This is an external conflict, and you can also connect this with real world issues. But Mrs. Cosgrove frees a slave, not of her own volition, but because she does not want a slave associated with her husband in the house. This is increasing the external conflict between her and her husband, and you could also make a real world connection to situations where if people are fired from their jobs or taken out of their jobs because of things not of their control. Third entry in chapter 15, page 178. Lizzie, when telling her story, and talking about the slave who killed herself and her child, she says, "Dead, Your Excellency, the President of this Republic, dead. Grave senators who grow eloquent over pensions and army wrongs. Dead ministers of religion who prate because poor men without a moment's leisure on other ends presume to read the newspapers on Sunday, yet who wink at or approve of such laws that occasion such scenes as this." And I connected this to political issues. Lizzie criticizes the law and those who associate with religion who allow occasions like this to happen, where the slave would rather subject themselves to being dead and their children than being in a worser situation or having their children in that worse situation or being separated from their children. And this could be attributed to situations where people are taken against their will, like, for example, ICE. But also, this could be, we could relate this to when politicians or people say this is God's will, this is what God wanted, and they exclude those people because it is what their religion might say, even though it's probably nothing that relates to that religion or that faith, and they're using that religion to harm others. Fourth entry in chapter 15. Mr. Cosgrove says that there is law in this country for the slave as well as the free, and if you attempt to injure them, you will find it so to your sorrow. Proud as you are and rich as you think you be, the key of the prison door has been turned on richer and nobler people times without number. You know so much. You should know that. Mr. Cosgrove threatens his wife with jail at the talk of injuring or dismissing the favorite slaves. But his wife mentions that the reason that she would be jailed is no benefit to him, so they are at a stalemate. I made this connection I really wanted to point out a personal opinion of mine, again, connecting to what I think. I believe how this is very unreasonable to me. Of course, Mrs. Cosgrove has her own faults with her racism and viewing of slaves, but Mr. Cosgrove tries to avoid blame entirely, and it is put upon his wife. It only serves to show not only the viewing of wives and women, but slaves being treated as objects. And I didn't put a thing for this one. I think this is chapter 15. No, this is 14. So Lizzie says, to think that she had been, when referring to Mrs. Cosgrove, she says to think that she had been rivaled by slaves, she with English and aristocrat blood in her veins. It was too much to be endured. But she had great self-command. Her tears soon dried as she said in a voice perfectly calm. I made a hierarchical connection to the slave, master, mistress, etc. hierarchy, and Mrs. Cosgrove, because she is hurt and offended that her husband has had children with slaves and has fancied them rather than her. And I also wanted to, and this could also relate to class issues in real life, where people of a higher class will think of them differently as people in a lower class. And they will look down upon people in poverty and think of themselves to be greater than them. And for chapter 14, Lizzie, upon reuniting with Lizzie shares that Hannah's teachings have spread through children and that they remember her with affection, and her name is often mentioned in the house. And she says that, Hannah remarks that she said that the children have grown to be great boys and girls, and that they remembered her with affection, and often mentioned her name and told how kind she was to them, to be used to them, or whatever, and how she taught them to pray and love one another. I related this to like a past events in the narrative because of her reuniting with Lizzie, and how her character, and referring to her character, her kindness, and what she's been taught, and how that made itself prevalent in the future of this narrative. Okay, and on page 157, chapter 13, that very day, an antiquated lady with a large mouth filled with false teeth and head covered with false hair and a thin, scrawny neck. I made a historical connection because these false teeth were likely made from the teeth of a slave. And if you wanted to make a modern connection, we have wigs and stuff that aren't very synthetic. Some wigs are synthetic, some are not, and some of these wigs are made with people who have to cut their hair to give money in like countries that are riddled with poverty, and they're poor and they need money, so they cut their hair for these wigs. And that is a modern connection you can make from this, even though it is not as nearly as bad. In page 170, chapter 13, Hannah meets Mr. Trapp again. Oh, then I knew him on the instant. I could have remembered his eyes and countenance among 1,000. It was Mr. Trapp. Whether or not the recognition was mutual, I had no means of ascertaining, but his presence to me seemed ominous of evil, and hastily murmuring my thanks, I hastened home. This is a personal conflict, which is external, and it's also a connection to past events in the narrative, because he is an antagonistic character from Hannah's past, and the external conflict that causes her, he is the external conflict that causes her to be nervous, so all of a sudden, and return home. And I made this as, since it is a past chapter before meeting Lizzie, it would probably be an indication that we would be meeting another character from the past in the narrative, which is true, because we met Lizzie again. And on page 160, chapter 13, when talking about Mrs. Wheeler, she says she always wanted me near and handy, she said. So when summoned, I could come on the instant. A little bell stood on a table by her side, and its ting-a-ring-ding reminded me of my servitude 100 times a day. This is a personal conflict, external conflict, because Hannah is used to serving more capable people. She compares Mrs. Wheeler to that of a spoiled child. Also, the wording here is like very devaluing and degrading, and the idea of devalue and vanity is used to portray Mrs. Wheeler's character. And you could connect this to real life, because in real life people have maids, and in real life those people who have maids degrade them and devalue them on a daily basis. Even though those maids could be highly educated, we don't know any thing about those people, those characters, but they would still degrade them because they are of service. They are doing a service. And for my last entry, page 161, chapter 13, a blacksmith's son indeed, an abolitionist, I dare say, who would reverse the order of nature and place Negroes at the top instead of the bottom of society. Really smiled at you, the wrench. This is when Mrs. Wheeler is talking of Mrs. Wheeler and Mr. Wheeler are talking about the entry in like the political area of this whole thing, and Mr. Wheeler is trying to get a job, and Mrs. Wheeler, when talking about the person who's competing, she thinks of them as an abolitionist, and it really goes to show how Mrs. Wheeler sees slaves and people who are against slavery. And I said this was a historical connection and conflict, and this was conflict with character Hannah, who is also a slave, and she has this conflict with abolitionism. And we can really see in a more modern context, we could probably connect this to, because we see how really hot the political, heated the whole politics is getting with Democrats and Republicans, and how they view each other, so we can make them that modern connection. And yeah, that's it.
Great.